welcome to the Nation Diplomatic Dispatch, your window into the world of diplomacy and international affairs. Since the establishment of formal diplomatic ties in the 1950s, Canada and Malaysia have cultivated a robust partnership characterized by deepening collaboration in trade, education, and cultural exchange. In 2024 alone, the total trade between Canada and Malaysia surpassed Malaysian ringgit 8 billion, approximately 1.67 billion USD, with exports to Canada increasing by 61.5% to a total of 559.8 million Malaysian ringgit, driven by higher exports of the electrical and electronic products. Now, as Malaysia continues to enhance its role in Southeast Asian region, understanding this multifaceted relationship becomes increasingly important. Today, I am pleased to welcome Her Excellency JODI Robinson, Canada's High Commissioner to Malaysia, who will share her insights on the current state of these ties and opportunities that lie ahead. Ramadan Kareem, and welcome to the set.
Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here today.
Now, how has Ramadan been treating you in Malaysia?
It's been wonderful. I've already gone to my first iftar event, which was very nice. It was with your Prime Minister and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it's just a wealth of cultural learning that I really am taking up in the last few months, and including in Ramadan. Learning more about this very important month.
And I believe the last 6 months that you've been in Malaysia has been quite eventful for you and the High Commission. So thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with a question that I'm sure is at the back of many people's mind, and let's get that out in the open. The relationship with the United States. And many countries have been grappling with this issue, especially of late, with President Trump's many announcements. So in particular, with President Trump's recent economic measures impacting the world and Canada, how does Canada plan to protect its economic interest while maintaining constructive relationship with the US?
Of course. And, you know, if I could just start by saying the Canada-US relationship, it's one of the, or has been one of the strongest economic relationships the world has seen. I mean, we have $2.5 billion worth of trade every day crossing the border. We have annual trade of $600 billion, or reaching up to that stage. It has been extremely strong. We have supply chains that run north-south, as well as with Mexico, that have been there for decades, and that industries are very much integrated. So to say that this is a challenging time, it very much is, and I think it's been proof to kind of look at how Canadians have reacted to the most recent actions by the U.S. administration and by comments made by the U.S. administration, including the President himself, about the 51st state. And so Canada has reacted by really unifying itself. I think you've seen Canadians, for those really following, whether it's on social media platforms or in the news, the term elbows up has really come to the fore.
Yes, really rallying.
Very much rallying to give a sense that Canada is a very strong, sovereign nation, but that we do have relationships still with America, and that we do want to continue to discuss. And our new Prime Minister, who just came into power, has voted the leader of the Liberal Party recently, has made it clear that we will continue and are ready to work with the U.S. administration, with Americans, to find a path forward. But of course, that is mutually beneficial and takes into account sort of both sides' asks and needs. So what we're doing and what we have been doing is very much focused on, one, putting in place right away, of course, some protections for Canadian workers. I mean, as an initial response, right? And so that also was ensuring through our Export Development Canada that there would be a program to help exporters reach new markets. And so really talking about diversification of trade. And just to point there, if I can, Nadia, it's not in reaction to the U.S. administration that Canada has been looking to diversify its trade. In 2022, Canada launched its Indo-Pacific strategy, and part of that, one of the key pillars, is about trade and investment in new markets. It's about reaching new markets. It's about focusing on this region, which is one of the strongest, you know, from an economic growth standpoint in the world, and looking at supply chain resilience, looking at where Canadian companies can go and to trade with, right? And so it's not as a result, but it does mean we're going to obviously step that up.
So it was always part of the plan, and now you're thinking of ramping it up even further.
That's right.
So what other exciting things we should be looking at, since you're saying that there is a focus more now on the Indo-Pacific region, not that it wasn't before, but the ramp up. So what would be the ramp up?
So the ramp up is going to be, it's a whole of government approach, right? And this is all heads of missions around the world are really focusing on, with their teams at the high commissions and embassies, looking at, okay, where are the opportunities for trade and investment? Where can we build on the current relationship, and in what key areas? And so it very much is sort of an across-the-board launch of what can we do more. And so, for example, Canada, Malaysia, we can definitely do more when it comes to trade and investment. And so what are the key areas that we can really work together on? Where is there sort of that synergy that we can bring together? And then, of course, increase Canadian exports to Malaysia, but also looking at Malaysian investment into Canada and vice versa. So I think there's definitely room to grow in that respect. And you know, the government is focusing on supporting exporters through our Can Export program, which gives them funding to actually travel to new markets as well. And so to be able to fly to Malaysia. And we just actually had a mission here from our Atlantic Canada provinces to actually look at some partnerships in areas of not just ag, but ocean technology, marine security, and
I think that's very interesting to see, because I remember that there's been twice at least now in the last 2 years or so that we've had naval ships from Canada dock over in Malaysia. We're not only talking about regional security, but we're also talking about new markets and new areas where collaborations can be done. And you said marine ecology and diversity. So I want to pull back on the fact that with the recent US announcements on pulling out of the Paris agreements and a whole host of other promises relations to the Sustainable Development Goals, I know that there's been a lot of debate on where are we going to be heading with the 2030 goals, whether Canada is going to be able to make it for its net zero 2050 targets. What are some of your thoughts on how this might play out? And what are some of the things that we can do together bilaterally, and as well as moving ASEAN in the right direction, so that it doesn't matter who has decided to pull in or pull out, we're still going to be heading forward?
Listen, Canada is not changing its approach in terms of sustainability, inclusivity, and the work that we've been doing, whether it's with the non-governmental organizations, whether it's grassroots movements in terms of the environment and protection, reaching our climate change goals, focusing on carbon capture, reducing our emissions, and supporting countries to reduce theirs. None of that has changed for Canada. We will continue to work with countries, we will continue to partner based on our values that everybody is aware of, which is to have a sustainable, inclusive relationship, to have a sustainable, inclusive world that everybody has the ability to access.
And when we're talking about everybody has the ability to access, I think the main critique for all countries right now is that while there are promises to be made globally in trying to reach these goals, there's been debate on how much of it is actually rhetoric and how much of it is actually achievable. Now, when you look at the targets that have been set not only by the Global North but the rest of the world, what are some of the key hotspots that you think, even if we give our best effort, we're not going to meet this target, so it needs a whole system change?
It's a very good question, Nadia. I think our biggest challenge right now from a global perspective in meeting our climate change goals is the current conflicts that are happening in the world. Conflicts, war, creates challenges in terms of emissions, because any kind of a conflict actually has emissions as well, whether you're bombing, whether it's chemical, whether it's through sort of gunfire. This already creates challenges in sort of preventing those carbon emissions, but it's also challenging because it disrupts supply chains, and those supply chains that are needed for the technology, those clean technologies, as simple as that, from getting from A to B, to ensure that everybody has access to those technologies. For a clean energy transition, it becomes more expensive as well. Greening an economy is not cheap.
Yes.
And I think, developing, emerging nations are aware of that. In order to green an economy, you need economic growth. In order to have economic growth, you need an open trading system that allows for greater trade. As we see the world is moving more protectionist, we see protectionist policies coming up in many countries, which will stifle economic growth, not just globally, but also domestically, because we've become so reliant on a free, open, rules-based trading system.
Yeah.
As that gets shut down, of course, economic growth is going to be stifled, which means domestic growth will be stifled, which then, unfortunately, comes into a play of how are we going to afford the greening of our culture.
It's very often the chicken and egg situation in a lot of these places. And I think what we've found in Malaysia is that despite the fact that we've got the new energy transition roadmap, we're also seeing the darker side of the movement towards green energy and clean energy. And there are many areas that are not as clean as they're thought to be. I want to ask you a little bit about economic resilience strategy, since you said about economic, domestic and international growth. Now, facing external economic pressure, I think, is something that all countries are currently facing. But what initiatives are being implemented in Canada at the moment to look at, bolstering and further growing the domestic economy and reducing the vulnerableness towards perhaps foreign policies?
Oh, no, of course. So one of the things that we're doing outside of diversification of our supply chains, and that takes time. You can't change a supply chain overnight, right? So that takes time. Is also looking internally. So in Canada, we have our own internal trade agreement, which has unfortunately created barriers with trade and investment between, actually main trade between provinces. So a prime example of that, not probably as popular in Malaysia, but is alcohol sales. And so each province, territory, is responsible for its own sales and distribution of alcohol. And so actually, if you live in one province, it can be very challenging to buy alcohol from another province, and there's a barrier in between, in that border. It's the same with recognizing certification, for example, of electricians. So it means labor mobility has been stifled. So there's been a lot of work over the years, but I think you find with this current situation, this very strong willingness and spirit coming to the table by the premiers of our provinces and territories and by the federal government to break down some of these barriers. It's been said that if we can break down these provincial, territorial barriers, we can add upwards of $200 billion to our economy, which is huge when you think about it, right? That's significant considering what we're facing with US tariffs right now. So I think there is really a really strong spirit amongst all leaders to really come through with that. And there, of course, are discussions happening constantly between the provinces, territories, and the federal government on what's happening south of the border, but also what we can do in Canada to strengthen some of that economic.
Definitely, and I can definitely draw parallels to what's happening in Malaysia, for example, the Peninsula, Malaysia and Borneo. And I know that when Canada is talking about perhaps unification of some of these differences in agreements and trade opportunities, I know that perhaps even access to health, for example, the universal health coverage that Canada promises for all of its people, is also looking at the access to affordable medicines and orphan drugs to ensure that the prices do not actually differ from province to province greatly. And there's been discussion between the government with large cap pharma companies to ensure that, when one, to your point earlier, when one province is actually paying X amount, another province is not going to have to pay X plus one because of the number of people that might be there. So let's talk about diplomatic engagements. And you're smiling, so I know this will be an interesting question. So how is Canada leveraging on its international alliances, both in terms of to counteract unilateral actions that we've already seen, names shall not be mentioned, but by larger powers that promote, very rules-based international order? Because we have seen nations at the moment just not listening or following the rule of law. So thoughts?
So this is not something that started a few months ago. There have been countries over the last many years, I would say, but several years in particular, as protectionism has grown in the world, whereby the rules-based trading system has been challenged. Canada has been and will remain a fervent supporter of the rules-based trading system. As a middle power country, as a country that depends on trade and exports for its economic growth and security, we need these rules, and we need countries to abide by these rules. So we've already requested WTO consultations on the implementation of tariffs by the US in terms of the aluminum and steel, and we will continue to pursue as well under the Canada, US, Mexico Free Trade Agreement. We will continually support the international rules-based system, not just in trade, but across the board, because we are a trustworthy country. We want to be considered around the world by our partners as a trustworthy partner, as somebody who will abide by its obligations, not somebody who will decide one day that we no longer want to follow this rule or this rule. Have we been challenged? Sure. as many countries have on certain issues, but we are willing to sit down and we're always willing to discuss and to decide and to work through any of those barriers and challenges based on the rules.
So if we're talking about energy collaboration, and let's take it down to ASEAN now. Earlier we were talking about international collaboration and trade. I want to pick your brains on where ASEAN's energy collaboration is heading. We know that Malaysia is prioritizing sustainability and definitely energy security with its chairmanship of the ASEAN. Now, how do you think Canada will be able to contribute to this move, especially understanding that you have the expertise in energy infrastructure?
So, in 2024, the Canada-ASEAN Business Council signed an MOU with the ASEAN Centre for Energy. So we've actually kind of already started to lay that groundwork of partnering companies, Canadian companies, with ASEAN member companies who are looking for strong, reliable technology, servicing, and know-how to help them move to a more sustainable energy transition. We're an energy powerhouse. I mean, we've been very fortunate from a natural resource perspective, as has Malaysia in many ways, right? And so we have really taken our energy to the next level to meet our climate change goals, of course, by looking at carbon capture and storage, by looking at utilization. We have, and I know this is a discussion that's still ongoing in Malaysia, have 15% of our electricity is nuclear, which we consider to be very clean. We have geothermal energy, and we have expertise, and that's growing. We use biomass now so using organic natural waste products, and it's something that we would love to work with Malaysia as well in that area. Hydrogen, I know Malaysia is also looking into this area, as is Canada, right? So that innovation of hydrogen, how do we bring that? So we really do with wind, solar, smart grids efficiencies, biofuels. Canada is very much taking all of its expertise and its talent and is really pushing through in these areas from an innovative perspective. And I think we can bring that.
Collaboration within ASEAN, for example, you said geothermal, nuclear. These are all types of energy that perhaps in ASEAN, although we know that we have the possibility to tap into, we're perhaps not as confident on how this will play out, especially in terms of all the different protections and all of the different security measures that need to be in place. For example, Indonesia is the seat of geothermal. So if we wanted to do something like that for ASEAN, this is a big area of moving ahead. So I think, would you see Canada perhaps taking lead as a partner of choice for ASEAN, especially in terms of this clean energy transition that we're looking at?
I think Canada can be a partner of choice in most areas of energy, just based on the fact of our, one, reputation. We have a very strong reputation, and two, our experience in energy transformation and in terms of green energy. You'd be surprised at the percentage of green energy Canada uses, and in Ontario touts about 100%, to be honest, of green energy for its electricity capacity. So I think we have the experience, we have the knowledge, we have, with the US, tariffs aside, huge energy partnership where we know what it is about sharing hydroelectric power with a neighbor, right? As Malaysia does with Singapore. We have looked at technologies that really are about smart grids to ensure that we're not losing any of that energy, right? Any of that hydroelectric power when it's being transferred. How do you make those grids smarter? Using, of course, AI technology as one area, right? Is to bring in that application. So I think Canada would be an excellent partner of choice just from that perspective alone. But it's also, even if there's doubt, we would welcome visitors to Canada. My trade team here, working with, of course, Malaysia's High Commission in Ottawa. Come see it for yourself. Come and speak to these companies. Let's, see where we can bring a delegation into Canada to actually meet with, not only the companies, but the governments that are using this technology, so that governments also get a sense of what has that meant in adopting that technology in order for their own energy consumption.
Definitely, and in trying to understand a little bit more about the Canada-Malaysia relationship, it's interesting that there are even growing ties in the space of aerospace, and that there's many things that are exciting that's being done right now. And Canada is actually Petronas's second largest resource holder after Malaysia. So that was interesting. I did not realize that 25% equity of LNG Canada, which was approximately Canadian 40 billion, is actually part of the private sector investment into Petronas.
Actually, they've also invested into a project that Northland Power, which is one of our larger wind power companies, that's doing off the coast offshore wind in Taiwan. And so it's actually also partnered Petronas in order to learn more about wind power and how that can be utilized in Malaysia.
I wanted to ask you very briefly about digitization and digitalization efforts. We know that ASEAN is a very young region in terms of its population, in terms of its demography, and we saw even the last year or so the election in Indonesia being won pretty much by social media movement. And we're going to see a lot more of that in ASEAN as we aim to become a digital hub. So what partnerships do you see can support the region and Canada to both mutually benefit as we move towards, bolster digital transformation in this region?
No, of course. I mean, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind right now is the opening of the Center of Excellence for BlackBerry, right? That was really for ASEAN. The Center of Excellence is based in Malaysia, but it really is a significant and positive advancement in this sector. And of course, the whole idea there is that this is to help ASEAN strengthen its cybersecurity in the region and communication channels, right? So BlackBerry right now, of course, is working with Malaysian government in order to provide licenses for a top grade platform for communications to keep them secure, which is critical in this day and age. But BlackBerry, not just on the BlackBerry side, but they're also providing training across the board to public servants as well. But anyone actually can go there for cybersecurity training to learn on how to deal with scams, misinformation, and potential hacks. What to look for in an email when you get an email, and how to prevent yourself from getting a virus.
Definitely.
Yes.
So with that, I just wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on how Canada and Malaysia can perhaps collaborate in this space of cybersecurity and even AI?
So I do believe there's a lot that we can do. The G7, Canada's chair of G7, we've already had a conversation, of course, with Malaysia counterparts in terms of ASEAN G7 collaboration. And one of those areas is AI. And so G7 under Canada's leadership is really looking about how do we responsibly use AI and adopt it and share it amongst sort of our companies, amongst some of our infrastructure projects in order to use it to power our economy. And so I think there's a lot that we can work on in that space. We need to build that, so we need to bring in the right government players, but we also need to kind of build it through private sector partnerships, right? Because it's really the adopters of AI are the private sector. And so really focusing on who we can bring together, who are the key leaders. I'm not sure people know this, but AI was actually born in Canada, in the cities of Montreal and Toronto. So we have the talent, we have the knowledge that we really would love to work with all members of ASEAN to sort of increase their capacity to adopt AI and to use it. And I think in Malaysia alone, from the semiconductor space and the data centers, AI and the adoption of AI in that sector will really help Malaysia bring it up a notch.
So what is your priorities for the next 6 months?
So for the next 6 months, I have so many, I have to admit. My first few months here, I've only been to 3 states now, not including, of course, this current one.
Yeah.
So I really want to get out and try to at least visit in the next 6 months as many more as I can. My goal is that by the end of the year, Canada, and not just from the trade war, but Canada in terms of a strong, reliable, trustworthy partner, is on the minds of officials across Malaysia and is also on the mind of companies considering Canada that maybe they hadn't before in certain areas, whether it's through energy security, whether it's for food security from an agricultural perspective. I'm not sure folks know, but Malaysia actually imports a lot of potash for their, of course, palm oil industry. Yes. So how can I get Canada considered in everybody's discussions when it comes to procurement, when it comes to partnerships, investments, new technologies? That's really my goal over the next 6 months, is just to ramp that up a notch.
And I'm guessing this would also include other spaces that have already been a notable area for partnership, for example, education. There's a lot of Malaysians that actually do go to Canada for studies, and we're seeing now vice versa.
Yes. So I would also love to see more. And it doesn't have to be for a full degree. So for example, we have a SEED program which talks about education, which is for a short term. You can do a research or you can do a semester. And we already have, through that program in the last 7 years, 117 students that have taken advantage of that from Malaysia to go. But it's across ASEAN. It's really about an ASEAN SEED scholarship funding to get more sort of crosswalks between our people-to-people connections is so critical. It's a pillar of our Indo-Pacific strategy, but it's also to us how you build relations and how, one, Malaysians better understand Canada and how Canadians can better understand Malaysia, right? And we have so much in common. We both have multicultural societies. We both come, from federated systems, and our laws, our rules, a lot of them are very similar in nature. So I really do see that there's a huge amount of synergy between our two countries.
That's wonderful. Now when we're looking at movement ahead. We know that we've had over 70 years of diplomatic relationships, and I hope that there are many, many more years. What are some of the future collaboration opportunities that you feel would be able to deepen and expand the relationship that we currently have?
I want to do more between our Indigenous communities. I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about, we both have very strong Indigenous communities, yes. and while we have invited some Canadian Indigenous folks to Malaysia where they've had collaboration, we also, through our Canada Fund for Local Initiatives, have funded some of the Malaysian Indigenous communities here in terms of some of their economic and social work that they've been doing. I think there's more we can do in that in terms of a cultural exchange, but also from a business. Indigenous community to Indigenous communities, to build businesses, to help them reach that. I think there's more we can do as well, just strictly on trade and investment. While our trade and investment grew by 8% over the last year, and you commented on some of the numbers at the beginning, there's so much room to grow, right? I don't think we fully tapped. So I would love to see a trade mission to Canada, and working with your High Commissioner in Ottawa to figure out, okay, what is the best sector that we can look at? Is it on energy security? Is it on looking at whether it's smart grids, nuclear, if that's where Malaysia goes? How do we tap into that to ensure that we're working together?
Definitely.
And Malaysia has a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises. Canada does as well. So to me, this is an excellent opportunity for us to introduce our small and medium-sized enterprises to, one, become part of the supply chains that I think we can work to create and to look at, but also a small company, to grow your domestic economy, you need to help those small and medium-sized companies to grow, to export, to look for new markets themselves. So while we're supporting Canadian companies to come to Malaysia, it's also Malaysian companies going to Canada.
I'd love to speak to you more about the Canadian and Malaysian relationship, but unfortunately that's all the time that we have today. Now, Canada's leadership amid global challenges remains vital and demonstrating resilience in economic stability and international cooperation. So as Malaysia and Canada continue to strengthen ties through collaboration in trade, education and cultural exchange, these partnerships must foster mutual growth and deeper understanding. So moving forward, such cooperation will be key to building a more resilient and interconnected future. I'm Nadia Blatif, and this has been the Diplomatic Dispatch, your window into the world of diplomacy and international relations. Take care and stay safe.